Hello everyone. On this episode of Misadventures in Travel, I am going to tell you about the time that our flight to the Bahamas was canceled. Okay, so it was our spring break, and I think it was when I was 15 or 16, and so I was like a sophomore, junior in high school, and my dad and I decided that we were going to go to the Bahamas for our spring break, and unusually for my dad, we decided we would fly there, okay? We had a flight reserved on TWA. TWA also does not exist anymore. So Trans World Airlines. And Trans World Airlines hub, or at least one of their hubs, was St. Louis. Okay? So almost every flight that you were taking on TWA, you were flying through St. Louis. And so we were going to be flying on TWA, Minneapolis to St. Louis, and then we had to change planes, and then it was St. Louis direct, I think, to Nassau. I think that's what it was. So anyway, when we get weather up here, I always kind of joke. There's 3 areas of the country when it comes to winter weather, okay? In the south, where it's so unlikely that you're going to have snow that it's not even worth discussing, okay? Except for the time that my son's high school music department got stuck in Dallas because of an ice storm. That's the only time I've ever heard of like winter weather affecting any kind of travel in the south, okay? Then you have up here in the northern part of the country where it would take like 15 feet of snow for us to close the airport. Seriously. We have all the equipment. We don't even blink. I mean, it's got to be a major blizzard for anything to affect travel up here because we can plow, we can salt, we can de-ice. We have all that stuff, okay? And it happens all the time. I mean, we just don't really get delayed because of weather. If anything, it's because something got delayed in some other part of the country and it bumped and affected other flights. So, and then there's the middle. The middle of the United States has a problem because once in a while they do get a little bit of winter weather, but they don't have any way to deal with it, so they don't know what to do. So they just have to shut everything down. So for example, if they get a half an inch of snow, everything just closes because, oh my gosh, there's snow, and they don't have any way to deal with it, so they just have to close everything. So that's what happened at this trip. It was March because I remember we were over there over my dad's birthday, which is in March. And when we got to the Minneapolis airport to check in for our flight, we looked at the board and we saw that every TWA flight was canceled because all the TWA flights went through St. Louis. And St. Louis got, I don't know, a fraction of an inch of snow that day. And so they freaked out and closed the airport. So every flight on TWA was canceled. So we're like, oh, great. What do we do now? This was the first time this had ever happened to us. Actually, I think this is the only time this ever happened to me where a flight was actually canceled. Oh, God. So anyway, I've had other plane scheduling issues, but I think this is the only time that my flight was actually canceled. And so we went to the TWA desk. And I really think the biggest problem in this scenario was, as I've told you, my dad is not a big flyer. He doesn't fly very often. I can probably count on one hand how many times he's flown in an airplane. And so he didn't ask the right questions. He didn't know what to ask, and he didn't really have the experience to know what to do in this situation. I mean, he knew enough. We went to the desk for TWA, and TWA already had a plan in place, and they put us on a flight, I don't know, American maybe, to Fort Lauderdale. So Minneapolis to Fort Lauderdale direct, okay? But my dad didn't bother to ask, what do we do when we get to Fort Lauderdale? Okay, so we fly to Fort Lauderdale. Flight was fine. We land in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm like, so now what? Because we're not in the Bahamas. And so we went and got in line back at the TWA desk because they were the ones that had issued our original ticket. Well, now I know, yes, you should do that, but you also need to get on the phone. However, I can't really blame my dad in this situation because, again, this is before cell phones. So really, unless one of us had gotten in the line and the other one had gone to a payphone and called TWA, I really don't know that there was another option. So we're back in the line at TWA's desk, at ticketing. And it was a long line, which makes sense because every TWA flight was canceled that went through St. Louis. So there's a lot of people in the same situation. I mean, we're in Florida now. The weather's gorgeous. So it wasn't an issue down there. But so we waited in the line at the TWA desk for a really long time. I don't know, it was like 45 minutes, an hour. It was a long time. And when we got up there, they looked us up, and turns out, this is where my dad forgot to ask the follow-up question, they had booked us on a connection from Fort Lauderdale to Nassau, but we missed it while we were standing in line. So what we really needed to have done was we needed to find out when we got on the plane in Minneapolis. So we're going to Fort Lauderdale, and then what are we doing? We didn't get the next step. So that was my dad's mistake. So anyway, we're like, shoot, so what do we do? So, and that I think was like the last flight from Fort Lauderdale to Nassau that day that we could get on, or like they were all full or whatever. So TWA gave us a taxi voucher to Miami International Airport. And I realize now that I've like researched cruising a lot and stuff, this is actually not that far. But at the time, all I could think, I wasn't really that familiar with Florida, and I was like, isn't that kind of far to go in a taxi? And we were like, well, why are you sending us there? And they said, well, when you get to the Miami International Airport, there's a lot of smaller airlines that fly to the Bahamas all the time. They go every hour. You'll be able to pick something up once you get there. And we're like, okay. So we had our luggage, because we just flown a direct flight from Minneapolis. And we went outside and we went to the taxi stand and we got in a cab, and our taxi driver was French. I remember that. He had a very thick French accent. And we handed him the voucher from TWA and we said, we need to go to the Miami International Airport. And I remember very distinctly, he said, in a taxi? And then we're like, yes, in a taxi. And so he took us to the Miami International Airport, and I don't know, it took like half an hour, 45 minutes. It wasn't that bad. And maybe it was longer. I don't know. It didn't seem like very long to me. It's all urban there. It's all like connected and meshed together. So it didn't seem like that long. It's interesting stuff to look at or whatever. And so he takes us to the Miami International Airport. And then I don't know how we knew this, but we went, I must add, this is before 9/11. So every Tom, Dick, and Harry can go to the gate. This is back when you could pick people up at the gate and you could drop people off at the gate and actually like wave goodbye to people as they're pulling away from the jetway. This is back then, okay? So anybody could go through security. Like, what was the point of security? I don't even know. Because, well, I guess, you still couldn't take anything onto an airplane if you went through there. But we went to the Bahama Air gate, the one that was assigned to Bahama Air. And I was obviously paying a lot more attention. A lot of my travel knowledge I picked up by myself, either by researching or reading or observing. I did not get it from my parents, okay? So I learned it as I went, and I read a lot about travel. So I've kind of learned as I go and picked up things and learned myself. So anyway, I was paying close attention, even though I was only like 15, 16 years old. I was paying attention to what was going on around me, and I was listening, and I knew somehow that we were on the standby list to get on a Bahama Air flight. And they were right. They were like every hour from Miami to Nassau. And I knew that our name was on the standby list. I think I had even gone up to the desk and they had showed me on the list that our name and Party of Two was on there. So I wasn't worried. I was just sitting there at the gate with our luggage waiting for them to call our name. My dad, again, left me. He took off, just left and went somewhere else in the airport. And I think where he was going actually was to a bank of phones, which, they'd have like a section where there'd be a whole bunch of payphones or whatever. And he left me again for, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours, whatever, sitting by myself. I would also like to point out that this was the 1980s, and one of the most popular shows on TV was Miami Vice. So Miami was basically a hotbed of drugs and crime. So my dad leaves me in the airport in Miami by myself, 15-year-old girl. Again, I don't know what he was thinking. Thanks, Dad. But anyway, I survived. I'm still here. He comes back after however long, all huffy, and starts gathering up our suitcases and goes, come on, we're leaving. And I'm like, what do you mean we're leaving? We're going to the Bahamas. And he goes, nope, I got us a hotel for tonight. We're going to go stay in the hotel, and then we're flying back home tomorrow. And I'm like, what? I'm like, but I want to go on vacation. I was really mad. I was like, Dad, we've come all this way. Why would we go home? And he's like, oh, I'm done with this. This is ridiculous. This is why he doesn't fly. And so he was all like trying to drag me off. And I'm telling him, no, Dad, we're on the standby list. We have to wait here. And he's like, no, we're leaving. We're going to the hotel. And while we're like having this little argument, they called us. And I'm like, see, we're on the standby list. We're getting on the plane right now. And he's like, what? And I'm like, we're getting on the plane. And he didn't understand. He didn't know what standby was. And so we go up to the desk and he's like, are we getting on this flight? And they're like, yep. It was the second to last flight of the night. And by now it was like 8, 9 o'clock at night. And so they're like, we have 2 seats for you and got to get on right now. So we get on the plane, we're going to get on the plane. And we said, well, what about our luggage? Because we had our luggage with us at the gate and it was too big to be, put on the overhead bin or whatever. And I said, the person who's paying attention says, what about our luggage? And they said, well, it's too late to check it now because like the plane was literally about to taxi away. They said, but we'll try to remember to put it on the last flight of the night for you. And I said, could you try really hard? Because I wanted my suitcase, And I'm thinking if they don't get it on the last flight, what's it going to happen to us? It's going to sit here? So anyway, we got on the Bahama airplane, which was one of the most terrifying flights of my life. This was a very small plane, like, I don't know, 15 people or something. It was really small. And you're flying through the air over the ocean. It was a very short flight. And we landed in Nassau, and it's now totally dark. It was like by the time we got there, it was like probably 10 o'clock at night. But by the time we, got off the plane and made our way to the luggage carousel, our suitcases were there. Yay, Bahama Air staff. So we got those and we got some kind of shuttle. I think we had a shuttle from our hotel. It was actually the hotel. Oh, it's in a James Bond movie. And I can't remember which James Bond movie it was. My dad and I have always been real big James Bond fans. And I've seen all of the movies. And I don't know if that's why he picked it, but I remember while we were staying there, I recognized things from this James Bond movie. And I can't remember which one it is. But if you look up like movie locations for James Bond movies in the Bahamas, it's one of those. It would have been an earlier one from the 70s or the 80s. Because I know there's been more than one James Bond movie set in the Bahamas or filmed in the Bahamas, and this was one of the earlier ones. So that was kind of cool. And anyway, we had a pretty good trip. I do remember my dad got sick, like he got like a really bad cold, and so that was kind of a bummer. And again, I had to spend kind of a lot of time by myself because my dad was laying down in the hotel room, but we still had an enjoyable time, and so we did get there eventually. So I guess my lesson for you from this story is that you need to research things ahead of time. And whatever form of transportation you're taking, especially if it's the first time you've ever done it, make sure you know your stuff. Like make sure you know what to do and where to go, and make sure you ask questions, especially if anything goes wrong. If something gets canceled or there's a delay and you're not sure about something, make sure you ask. That's what the staff is there for. And if they don't know, they're going to find somebody for you who does know. So you really want to make sure that you stay informed, because it really would have been a bummer If I had just followed my dad out, gone to the airport hotel, and flown home the next day and hadn't gotten to have the vacation, that would have been a huge waste of money and not any fun. And so, again, if he hadn't listened to his kid, me, he wouldn't have gotten to go either. So it's really important that you, again, are aware of your surroundings and that you research and that you have as much information as possible to work with. So that's my advice to you for this one. So again, I thank you guys for joining me on this latest episode of Misadventures in Travel, and I will see you next time. Have a good day.